Madam Speaker, with your leave, I rise to make my own contribution on the bill before this Honourable House, entitled Anti-Corruption Bill 2023. And I want to start by giving strong commendation to the learned Attorney General in pursuit of the good governance agenda of this new Labour Party administration. We gave a commitment to the people of St. Kitts and Nevis, and as much and as far as it is possible, we will attempt to fulfill those commitments. And so I want to extend the commendation to our Prime Minister as well, who leads a cabinet who fully supports the important steps we are making toward becoming an example of good governance, not just in the OECS, not just in the CARICOM, not just in the Caribbean region, but across the entire globe. There is no reason why we cannot be one of those countries, despite our size, who leads the charge in bringing about good governance for our people. It is important to note, Madam Speaker, that this is an incremental step in our journey of good governance. So, by no stretch of the imagination do we expect that this legislation alone will either be a panacea or will be completely perfect, because as we begin to exercise the tenets of the legislation, we will become more informed in order to tweak it as much as possible to our situation here in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. So this is part of the ongoing continued engagement of the public as we build out our good governance agenda. I want to turn for a moment to the World Economic Forum that had said in some information that I saw that corruption costs developing countries $1.26 trillion. Some others estimate it at $2.6 trillion a year. That's the cost of corruption. That's roughly the combined size of the economies of Switzerland, South Africa, Belgium, and enough money left to lift the 1.4 billion people who get by on less than $1.25 a day above the poverty threshold and keep them there for at least 6 years. Let's understand that. One of the major threats to developing countries, sometimes singular in nature, is the cost of corruption. And the global cost, and we will come to it and we can bring it down to figures here, about $2 trillion that can take over the economies of thriving countries and lift 1.4 billion people out of poverty for 6 years. That's the cost of corruption. The Honorable AG mentioned that of the approximately 13 trillion US dollars that the government spends on public spending, 25% of it is lost to corruption. And that is really around the global figure, where there are not sufficiently strong anti-corruption legislation and practices, that it's around 30% or thereabout. So where you have laxed approaches to good governance and anti-corruption, it is costing about 30% of public spending. That's the estimate. Madam Speaker, naturally then, this is going to take a significant toll on the social well-being of developing countries. Because if, for instance, we are saying that a government is spending $100 million, bring it down to our sizes of economies, $100 million on public spending, and 30 million of that is being lost to corruption, then I would suggest to the member from number 9, it is prudent to spend $200,000 to save a significant amount of that. Because the reality is, what is accepted is that the money lost to corruption can have significant impact on the everyday lives of many persons who even fall below the poverty line. It means that if you, as a small developing country who do not have the structure or the legislation to deter corruption and to catch acts of corruption, it means that by implementing measures in an incremental way, you will now be able to direct public funding to critical elements of your society, including education. So take, for instance, the member from number 1, who mentioned that there was $14 million spent on managing dirt for the new Bastia High School. You want to tell me
$14 million could have bought a laptop.
That $14 million could not then purchase all the laptops we need for our high schools for 28 years?
Correct.
In the middle of COVID.
And they could supply all the windows for all the schools and preschool in the country.
$14 million. That's the cost of corruption. It's one example. Or we could have a situation where our people need access to health care, but the security contract at the hospital is out of proportion.
Over 900,000 a year.
People are being paid to provide IT services who are associated with political parties, but no IT service benefit to the people. And so now we cannot go forward with ensuring that we have all of the medicine and everything you need for our healthcare system to be where it ought to be. Because we have not yet put the mechanism or the structure in place to deter what unfortunately we have now seen with our eyes coming into the cabinet, some of the activities, especially over the last 7 years. And so this is a bold but necessary step to ensure that your tax dollars, our tax dollars that we pay, can be rightly channeled to things that affect everyone, from the preschooler, who then we could offer complete assistance to private and public preschoolers, to ensuring that all of our schools are beefed up to have high-tech and innovative solutions to rival other countries, to making sure that we have an MRI in our hospital and not squeezed away somewhere else, that if you just happen to have ate a little too much, you can't fit in it. Because we don't have any structure in there to prevent those simple forms of corruption. No, that ain't the corruption. The corruption is the refusal of the government to put a significant investment like that, although promised, where it ought to be so that it can have universal access, but rather keep it someplace where close relatives, friends, and counterparts can make a killing on it. That's the type of corruption. The money can be used to ensure that we have safeguards for people who legitimately cannot find work, so that when we are evaluated, the IMF and these people don't say, well, you need to cut back on your social program because your revenue is not enough for this and so on. But if we were to cut out, get back that 30% or even half of it, we will be legitimately able to have the safeguards necessary for people who might have reasons not to be at work. Our elderly who are at home with nobody to take care of them. I visited, this person is not elderly, but I visited a home of someone who is going through some medical challenges. The person has young children. And you can tell that there is nobody who is assisting in keeping the home as a healthy environment. When you are able to curtail the corruption, you're going to be able to address a number of these social issues.
Sure.
So corruption here is not just about, or anti-corruption is not just about being holy or pious or anything like that. It is actually a cost benefit to the country. And if it is going to cost us, a prosecutor, let's say you pay him a lot of money, higher, more than the Prime Minister or more than the AG, we can't pay him more than the member from number 9 though. Even if you were to pay that an office and it runs you $200,000-300,000, what is that as a business model to save $30 million? And I'm only calling a small figure because our actual economy is close to $1 billion, right? Our spend is for this year is $1 billion. And corruption sometimes does not necessarily take the form of just the overt ways. What this legislation seeks to do is to have a start as to how we are going to get some cost benefit as well to ensure that our taxpayers' money is being used in the best way. So there is a social toll and an economic cost to corruption. It diminishes public trust because, as other members would have mentioned, people are saying, or they like to say, politicians are corrupt. Well, it is true this legislation goes beyond just the politician. This touches everybody, just as a tool to deter and detect acts of corruption. But when you have no systems in place, because there are certain institutions in St. Kitts and Nevis, when you go to do business with them, I'm not going to call the names in order not to, assign any blame on certain business places. But there are certain businesses you go to where you have some level of trust because you believe that they have systems in place to maybe protect your money, to give you something what you go and buy, you believe because it is that particular company you're going to get something credible. And there are some that you don't trust because of how they operate. They pull you in a corner, come and give this quick. Like the other day, I was somewhere and not in St. Kitts, and a car pull up next to us and say, hey, we got a good stereo in here. You want to buy it? Just a car out of the random, we buy a stoplight, pull up, we got a good stereo in here. You could get it for a good price. There's no way that I am going to trust that person. But perhaps if later down the road I saw a mobile unit for Best Buy, when I purchase that stereo, I am trusting, I have some level of trust that it should be coming from a legitimate place. It is the same thing in public service. If you put your structures in place such that when you go to conduct your government business and you know that there are protocols, there are safeguards, there is legislation there, it will augur public trust. But in the absence of those, we have seen that public trust is diminished. And so people choose alternative routes to get what they need to get because public trust is diminished. So what is the benefit then? Since there's such a huge cost, what is the benefit that we could look? I want to look at it in this perspective of pursuing anti-corruption legislation and the good governance agenda. I want to look at what they call the Corruption Perception Index, where they rank countries of the world in terms of how corrupt they are or are not. At the last perception index I have here, I'll call out a few names of countries that are on that list. So we're going from least corrupt, come down. This is 400 and something countries, but I'll only look at the first couple. You have Denmark, Finland, New Zealand, Norway, Singapore, Sweden, Switzerland, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Germany, United Kingdom, Hong Kong, Austria, Canada. Those are a few at the top. How many is that? I'm not even sure. A few. Maybe in the teens. That is the Corruption Perception Index. Now, why are you talking about that index, Konris? Well, let us look at the countries that are doing well socially. Let us look at one by Numbeo. which ranks the 10 countries with the highest quality of life. Switzerland, Denmark, Netherlands, Finland, Australia, Iceland, Austria, Germany, New Zealand, Luxembourg. Let us look at the top 10 countries with the highest quality of life according to the US News Best Countries Report 2021. Canada, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Switzerland, Australia, Netherlands, Finland, Germany, New Zealand. Let us look at the top countries for quality of life. These are different people who are rating these countries. By CEO World: Finland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, Sweden, Switzerland, Netherlands, France, Germany, Japan. 10 countries with the highest Human Development Index, reported by the United Nations: Norway, Ireland, Switzerland, Hong Kong, Iceland, Germany, Sweden, Australia, Netherlands, Denmark. Do you see a correlation, Madam Speaker?
No, sir.
You don't see it?
The elephant in the room on a lot of Western climate.
There is a direct correlation between a lower level of corruption and a better standard of life. What I should have done here is to, and maybe I could still, but I encourage anyone, I can bet that the persons who are on the lower end of the corruption scale, meaning who have the most corruption, probably have it here, are the ones with the worst standard of living. And so there is a direct correlation with persons who have low levels of corruption in the country, or countries that have low levels of corruption, with the quality of life. I don't think that's arguable. Because what you have is, when you have less corruption, then the public funds are usually better diverted to what they need to do. And so that is what we should be aiming for. Now, some mention was made of this earlier, that there was 20 years in one part and nothing happened, which is not true, because it is the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party that passed the integrity in public life. But there's an important argument which the member from number 9 did allude to in some way. But I want to look at the unity coalition that came to government in 2015. There were a number of things that they spoke about. But what was seminal, what was central to their argument, not a side note, not a by the way, it was a campaign on good governance. That was the central theme. If you look at their 2015 manifesto, and if you recall, it was the central theme of their campaign. In fact, on page 43, of their manifesto. Oops. 1 second, Madam Speaker. On page 43 of the manifesto for the now collapsed Unity Coalition, it talks about the good governance agenda. Pass a Freedom of Information Act allowing all citizens and residents of our nation have the right and ability to access information with regards to affairs of their government. Throughout the 7 years, as the member for number 9 said, bring piece of legislation and provide no opportunity for it to become activated and have any relevance to the society. Nothing. Empower the ombudsman, didn't happen. Institute campaign finance reform, that didn't happen. Pass legislation and regulations including integrity in public life and not together, as the member from number 9 is suggesting. Pass integrity in public life and anti-corruption laws that require public officials to disclose assets and sources of funds. It was a seminal piece of their argument to the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. I remember seeing certain people who dressed in white to say, they want good governance. And the member for number 7 in particular played on those things and invited people in because although he served 18 years in the former administration, he sought to pull wool over people's eyes in suggesting that he was never there. That he never served. That he never even took the initiative, if the government was not doing it, to bring it to the cabinet and say it's time to pass good governance agenda. Never happened yet. Not once. And it was a seminal piece of the argument to the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. But as you know, 7 years passed and not one piece of movement on good governance.
Madam Speaker, point of order.
Not one.
The members should be...
All right, I recognize. Honourable member for number 3, the honourable member for
has to be a correction.
7 rose on a point of order. You have to let him speak first.
The member again is misrepresenting the Freedom of Information Act. For example, was passed. The motion of no confidence bill was passed. Public Accounts Committee bill was passed. And it is blatantly untrue, to say nothing. So, it's blatantly untrue for the member to continue down that road in light of the evidence. Evidence of what we have done. Even the integrity
Both of you can't be on
life,
your feet. One at a time.
public life legislation began to operationalize. It is we who, example, appoint members of the commission, provided an office and put it to work. So it's untrue.
Right, so Madam Speaker, I will take 2 minutes to completely refute the position that the member from number 7 can stand in the National Assembly to say that they effected anything that could count towards good governance. 1, the Freedom of Information Act, it's on paper. Not one thing, not even 0 things, not one.
Madam Speaker, again.
Has been.
Honourable member for number 7, I allowed you to speak, and I told the honourable member for number 3 not to interrupt you. You need to afford him the same privilege. When he's finished, you can respond, but allow him to complete his presentation.
Not one, Madam Speaker, in freedom of information. In fact, I was in this parliament when the Honourable Attorney General at that time said it could take 10 years before anything can come to fruition. I've always said that at that time the government was interested in headlines, not action. With the Public Accounts Committee, there was an existing legislation in the law for Public Accounts Committee in our National Assembly Act. They repealed that and brought legislation that took away all the teeth from the Public Accounts Committee, such that that committee could only have to refer to the auditor's report that is always a year behind any action.
Is this your completed response?
No, it's part of my presentation.
Stop your time.
Oh, sorry. Thanks. Thank you. So yes, you could start the time now. I will continue. So not one iota of substance.
You've stopped
Yes.
responding?
Yes.
So I have to rule.
Oh.
Yes, because
thank
you've
you.
responded. Honourable Member for number 7, are you finished with your point?
I only to make the point again, because specifically with the information, freedom of information, there was an appointment of persons working in the office of the Attorney General, dealing with this very matter, providing analysis and working towards the implementation. The position of information officer was there, and persons were there. Again, things were being done in a proper way.
Very well, so you're not refuting the other things, you're only speaking of one.
No, I've given the whole list. He has given his view on them. The point I am making is that it is a falsehood to say nothing was done in light of all of those things that one has. I have enumerated, and there are many more, but I think I've given enough to make the point that it's really a falsehood for the honourable member to move along that line.
Very well, your point is noted, and you can further explain if you're making a presentation. Proceed, Honourable.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I want to stress the point that over 7 years, today we cannot see any operationalizing of any part of the good governance agenda. Today, we can't do anything with freedom of information. Today, the Public Accounts Committee has no teeth. Today, the Integrity in Public Life Commission has no ability to operate. It was set up for sure, but no money afforded to them to operate.
7 years now.
What, did they even have a copier or anything? So it is sometimes unbelievable that persons will try to continue even after a repudiation by the electorate to say, look, I did put you there for your good governance agenda, and you failed to deliver, and so we're going to take you out. What we're doing here is trying to fulfill the commitments that we made when we said we are going to be the ones that are going to continue and pursue the good governance agenda. But I want to address that point a little further, Madam Speaker, in saying that there is a maturity that is expected over time for governments. Meaning that when things come to the table and become central themes, the onus is on us to follow through. So then, good governance came as a central theme. There was an onus for us to follow through. Remember that governments used to support slavery. It was legal. Remember, governments used to support segregation. It was legal. Governments used to support sexism. It was legal. But there is a level of maturity that comes with time and in democracy that governments must go through. So it's not sufficient to say that in 1890 you didn't pass any good governance. Maybe the country had not matured to that point. But certainly in 2015, it became a central theme where the country had said, we are now ready. And so it was incumbent upon the administration then to pursue it. But they did not. But there is a reason they did not pursue. And in particular, whomever was leading that particular charge did not pursue. And as members of the cabinet, we are seeing many of those reasons why people would choose not to pursue the good governance agenda. Many, many reasons. And to be honest, depending on how much the member for number 7 wishes to speak on this issue, I believe will then contribute to the number of files we will have to respond with. So depending on how, much the member says, Mr. PM, you got to release a multiple of the files relating. You know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about.
Okay. And I want to state this very carefully, that these rules of this House does not prevent the statement of facts.
No matter how they hurt.
Does not prevent the statement of facts. So when it is that we say that the land distribution was a corrupt practice, that is a fact. Why? When you could have somebody named Rita Agatha Brown. That's a made-up name. The made-up name, so I don't know who has that name. But when you have a Rita Agatha Brown who has the authority to sign off on government land and signs off on one for a Rita Brown, the next day sign off on one for Agatha Brown, and Rita Agatha Brown is the same person, and then go and sign off for her, didn't say she had a daughter named Millie Brown, and sign off one for Millie Brown yet, who is not even to age to own land. That is corruption. And that was overseen, I believe, the substantive minister at the time for that ministry was the member from number 7. So these house rules don't give any member the opportunity to stand and say. And that's why I asked, people must quote the rules. Quote the rule you're referring to. It doesn't tell you that you can't say that they were corrupt practices. It doesn't prevent the statement of facts. In my constituency, number 3, it doesn't prevent us from saying that persons who not only have, lots of land and so on, but allocated acres of land, preventing us from being able to provide affordable land to people. Doesn't prevent us from saying that people were given instructions by ministers of government, by ambassadors who sign in to say that work was done. For works done for the government but not procured through the government system. So a minister said, look boy, this is May 2022, June. I see you got a hill up there, you need some cleaning, go clean it. Send in your bill to Public Works. It costs $10 but charge 100,000. That's why I said depending on how much people are willing to go back and forth is the amount of files you have to release, Mr. PM. So what we are saying here is that we are attempting to bring about some legislative change for us to go on the journey of good governance. None of us here are perfect in any way at all, and we're always going to be susceptible to mistakes and so on. But we have to start putting in the tools to be able to guide ourselves, to help us to navigate the thorny issue of the line between corruption and good practices. And we know the good book, Honorable Member from number 1, has a lot to say about corruption. Hosea 9, verse 9 says, they have sunk deep into corruption, as in the days of Gibeah. God will remember their wickedness and punish them for their sins. Isaiah 1:4 says, "Woe to the sinful nation, a people whose guilt is great, a brood of evildoers, children given to corruption. They have forsaken the Lord, they have spurned the Holy One of Israel and turned their backs on him." Galatians 6, "Because the person who sows to his own flesh will reap corruption from the flesh, but the one who sows to the Spirit will reap eternal life from the Spirit." Genesis 6, all the way in Genesis. God observed all this corruption in the world, for everyone on earth was corrupt. And we know what he did. But this one is a nice one, coming from a book called Timothy. 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 to 5 reads, "You must realize, however, that in the last days difficult times will come. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, unfeeling, uncooperative, slanderous, degenerate, brutal, hateful of what is good, traitors, reckless, conceited,
All that in the verse.
and lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. They will hold on to onward form of godliness, like they will go to church all the time, but deny its power. Stay away from such people." 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 to 5. And you wonder why you never had a 3rd Timothy. Deuteronomy 31:29. That's not that one. Let's do Ephesians 4:22 to 23. "You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds." The point here is that we are going to mature. We would have had our flaws, we would have not done some of the things that we need to do. But at some point we need to move the dial forward. We have to take that bold step to say we are going to start the process. And I appreciate that the legislation in its form can never be perfect. You just can't, we can't get it right just on the first go, otherwise the age really should be the age of the world. But what this is a tool to help us along the way. And it is going to be an important tool to help to guide public officials and other people as to what is expected of us in public service. This legislation is meant to give confidence to the electorate that their public officials are focused on their business. The Labour Party started this in passing the Integrity in Public Life legislation, but we went further. Even in opposition, our party went through the establishment of the Code of Ethical Conduct, or Code of Ethical Conduct, where we all as candidates had to sign on to say that we are going to behave in a particular way, that we're going to declare. Imagine in a forward progressive party like ours, when we were going through our candidate selection process, where people had the opportunity to say they want to vie to be a candidate, we have to go through a process. In that process, in constituency number 3, I was the only person who applied. And even though I was the only person, I was still subjected to the process. I had to go in and discuss and declare what my financial position is, if I have anything against me, did I meet all of the ethical requirements, The Labour Party led, even quietly, maybe many didn't know that, but we had to go through that process. Because we are serious of giving it a shot, giving it a try. Because we have seen that where we reduce corruption in the world, standard of life increases. And what are we here for as members of this government? Not to improve the lives of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis? And so we will continue in iterative steps to improve this piece of legislation and also our good governance agenda. The key here for people listening though is to generally just try to do good. We're gonna stumble, we're gonna fall, we know that. We're gonna, try to make the right decision, maybe say, it's gonna happen. But just try to do good. Just try to do good. So you don't have to be worried, boy, I wonder if this here. Just try to do good. I think Madam Speaker is a lawyer, and we have a number of lawyers in here. The AG, we have the member from number. You're not one. They tell me I'm a lawyer by osmosis. Because I lay very close to one. We have a number of lawyers in here. And generally, the law is not aggressive to people who are trying to do good. Even when they make a mistake. Because there is something in law called intent. So sometimes you could accidentally make a big mistake, but you didn't have the intent. And so you can't get charged for the big thing, or you can't get the full sentence. Some. You might get a little slap here or there and so on. So just do good. Just try to do good. So, Madam Speaker, if you would allow, I want to just go through some of the actual text of the legislation before I bring my contribution to a close.
Just to inform you, you have 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So again, I want to commend the mover of the bill, the Honourable AG, and our Prime Minister and the Cabinet for the support to pursue this particular agenda. And it really warms my heart that we are attempting to chart the course on this good governance journey. We take note of the contributions made of those on the opposite side on how we will further enhance this piece of legislation, because we are going to be a government that accepts constructive criticism of what we're doing. We're not going to practice what I have seen in this honorable house, where the government side know it all. I remember sometimes I wanted to make a little correction in committee stage, a legitimate correction, maybe a word spelled wrong, and the member of number 7 was so anxious to cut me down. And all I was doing is, look, I remember one time we had, I think it was a fishing bill that had some things that were draconian in it, that needed altering and so on, for the benefit of the people. And some members want to jump on you. No, we're not listening. Who you be? We're not going to be like that. We're going to invite persons to be a part of the process. And I believe that they've had the bills for quite some time, so that they are able to make suggestions if they wanted to. We're going to be inclusive like that. And so if we look at item 23, just so that the general public, and I want to encourage everyone, which website can they go on right now, Honourable AG? The Law Commission? lawcommission.gov.kn. lawcommission.gov.kn, and download the legislation so that you can take your time and go through some of it. It is nothing to be afraid of. Because if you try to do good, you will find that you fall in line. So item number, section number 23, which deals with the prevention of corrupt conduct, because that is the essence of the law. And I wanted to, maybe I can speak about this now. I mentioned it, the member from number 9 mentioned it, where he spoke about the definition of, well, before, let me go in order. So item number 23, section number 23, basically deals with the prevention of corrupt conduct. And the attempt here is to prohibit corrupt conduct of public officers. Public officer, I'll read some of it. A public officer shall not engage in corrupt conduct, including any offense specified in part 1 of second schedule, of which I read some of it. But importantly, a public officer who contravenes subsection 1 commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding $30,000 or imprisonment of a term of 6 months, or both. A public officer shall not engage in corrupt conduct, and in part 2 speaks about what conduct that is. But 4 here says, a public officer who contravenes the subsection 3 commits an offense and is liable on conviction on indictment to a fine not exceeding $100,000 or imprisonment for a term of 3 years or to both. Basically, we're saying we want to prevent and deter corrupt practices. If we go on to 30, speaks about fraud on government or statutory corporations. We want to ensure that when boards and corporations are conducting the business on behalf of the government, that they are aware that their obligation is to the benefit of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis as a whole, and not to themselves or people associated with them. Section 32, again, preventing bargaining or bartering of public office. That you could get a public office if you do this and so on. In fact, some of the things outlined here, many of them are not particularly practiced in our jurisdiction. But you must make sure that you have the legislation for, in the event that they happen, you have the ability and the tool to deal with it. 33 speaks about influencing or negotiating appointments. You must go through a process to make sure that the appointments to different positions are done in a proper way. Yes, that was 33. So I wanted to address the point that the member from number 9 was making about the definition of what is considered a conventional and good faith hospitality or minor gifts. Now I agree, over time you have to start putting limits and figures, because in other established democracies that are far or more ahead in their good governance agenda, actually put some specific limits as to, okay, if it is worth $10, you could hold it. If it is worth $1,000, you need to put it here. In fact, some countries, all the gifts that you receive on a foreign trip don't belong to the person who receives them, but belongs to the country. So they have to go in the office of the president or in the office of the senator. It cannot be the personal gift of the senator. We are going to get to those things where we're going to define them specifically. Because the idea is not to hamstring, or that's right, hamstrung ourselves, or to inhibit ourselves from engaging in multilateral discussions on how to move forward. But we are going to put the structure in place to make sure that no undue influence is made on public officials as we carry out our duties. And that is what I wanted to stress out, that I think the member from number 9 was missing. He spoke only about the receiving of minor gifts or good faith hospitality. But the part that's important to note here is where it says, on page 17, second schedule, section 2, number 1, part A. The sentence reads and carries on to here where it says, may influence, well, let me read the whole thing. A public officer demanding, accepting, or receiving gifts, favors, hospitality, or any other benefit for himself or herself, his or her family, close relatives, and friends, or persons or organizations with whom he or she has or had a business or political relationship, which may influence or appear to influence the impartiality with which he or she carries out his or her duties, or may be or appear as a reward relating to his or her duties. That's the important part I want to say. Where it may influence or appear to influence the impartiality with which he or she carries out his or her duties, or may be or appear as a reward relating to his or her duties. So if you're going to receive a gift, a minor gift, and that gift appears to be the deciding factor. For instance, let us say you receive a watch or a pair of shoes, and there was supposed to be a decision of going a particular way with, let's say, solar energy. And it appears from you accepting that maybe some German intelligence was listening in. And you then decide to, you know what, we're not going to move forward with that. It appears that that gift influenced the impartiality with which he or she carried out his or her duties, or might have been a reward for carrying out their duties. And so we're going to flesh this out over time to make sure that the specific guidelines are there. But this is definitely a step in the right direction. And Speaker, as I wind, one of the things I don't want us to do is to continue to normalize the shortcomings that exist right now to prevent us from moving forward on the good governance agenda. Because you're going to always say that, well, suppose this happened, suppose that happened, so it means we must not act. No, we have to take the step. This is a progressive government that, as we take the steps, we understand that maybe next month, when we start to do some engagements, you might have a group of people say, but wait, now that we've looked at this closely, this particular thing affects the wrong person. Well, this is a government that will say, okay, no problem, AG, pull out your pen, let's make an amendment there, and we come right back here and make the adjustment. This is not a piece of legislation, and the ones that we're going to discuss after, to say that it's done, locked, and that's it. It's a process, and we will go on that process. The member from number 9 also spoke about, suppose the only person who qualifies for a job is your wife. What you're going to do? First of all, the ideal thing in the situation is if it's a family member, we need to get to those things. You can recuse yourself. You are not the only one who can do it. But if the wife is the only person who qualifies, well, choosing her, how is that corruption? Who are you preventing? If she is the only one who qualifies. So by his example alone, that could never be a definition for corruption. Because if you follow the process and if you have metrics that are used to determine who must qualify for X, and the person comes out and that person happens to be a relative to you and you had nothing to do with that decision, and they're the only one who qualifies, well, what kind of corruption that? Which court or which prosecutor going to bring a charge against you for that? Now, the member from number 9 also spoke about it should not just be legislation, it should be action. that a lot of prosecutions are not made and so on. Well, this is the tool that will allow us to do action, because now it is defined what certain types of corruption is or are. Types are. This is a tool that will help us to do that. Because if, for instance, driving, I'm just calling something, driving with your hand out of the car is not, we understand it's dangerous, right? Because it could get knocked off by an oncoming car. But there is no legislation that says that you can't drive with your hand outside the car. Then you're not committing anything. Nobody can prosecute you for anything. But if we come to the parliament and we say, you cannot drive with your hand sticking out the car, then now there is a tool that we can use to prosecute. And so what this legislation allows us is for a tool for us to investigate.
Honourable Member, you are out of time.
Thank you. If I may, colleagues, with your permission, seek 2 minutes just to close the 3 minutes. 5 minutes to close the discussion.
Honourable members, the Honourable Member for St. Christopher 3 has requested to speak for a further few minutes. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Proceed.
Thank you, colleagues across the aisle and here. So this is a tool that is going to afford us the opportunity to do action. Because right now we don't have the tools or the proper tools to do action. And I note the point of setting up another substructure, for instance, like the special prosecutor to do these things. And I am pretty sure that the AG will address those in his wrap-up. But I would posit that anti-corruption is an ongoing affair. And your tool must be there to know that it is always working. In advanced democracies, they have what is called checks and balances. They always check in. They're always investigating. Well, this is what this office needs to do. It has to be always checking and always investigating. But if nothing there to find, well, they don't find anything. But it must be there. It's like the little dog that they bring when you bring in your suitcase and check in and so. It ain't gonna bother you if you ain't got nothing in your suitcase. But if you put the dog away and say you must just use human nature to check the bags and so, you mightn't find anything. And so maybe perhaps we do not want to overburden the already stretched DPP's office and provide a tool at that office's disposal, which is what a special prosecutor is, to investigate and see whether or not there's merit to move forward. And so I want to end by giving my full support to this bit of legislation. I think it is a step in the right direction, and it is a commitment made and a commitment kept. And as the Honourable AG now stands to wrap up this bill, I want to give full support to this bit of legislation, and we will come back after to speak about some others that I think will only augur the best for us as we journey on our good governance path. May it please you, Madam Speaker.